You know, Mount Hamilton is just one of those Northern California races that everyone has to put on their calendar. And not just for Northern California, actually, for across the US, I've known a lot of people who said, oh yeah, I know about that race. I've heard about it, and I've heard it's really epic.
I really feel like there is a mystique about the Mount Hamilton Classic simply because of the way the race starts, just directly up the climb. Plus the length and the difficulty of the climb, it's just so epic. I think back to all the races I've ever done in my career, and I can't think of another race that compares.
It's just a classic for the West Coast, and it's so well known. And the winners in the past are so well known for going on and doing, you know, amazing things within U.S. domestically.
You know, I think the race should go on forever, whether there's prizes or not. It's just an epic race, and you know, it's a classic. It's one of those Northern California classics.
It's a tough race. It's kind of about survival in my experience. I was so dehydrated. I ended up in the bushes in the shade, kind of trying to find a creek, which had almost dried out by then. So the 74 was a disaster.
I didn't really know the course that well. I had some idea. I mean, I knew the uphill and I knew the downhill, but I didn't know how far it was to the finish. But you know, it was just give it your best shot and do or die.
Once they get on 130, once they go up Alum Rock and make that hard right, game on.
It's so hot and you're just, you know, hallucinating out there. You sort of forget about the rollers on the backside and all those. You think it's over when you get to the observatory, but the worst part is on the backside, all those killer rollers. I don't know, I think it's one of those races where unless you're George Mount, it probably doesn't really help to have a strategy. You know, it's sort of, like I say, survival and luck, and see how you're doing on the other side.
What's special about the Mount Hamilton Classic is that it starts right away into the climb. Normal races have a climb at the end, maybe a hilltop finish, but with the Mount Hamilton Classic, it just starts so hard right away from the gun all the way to the top of the climb.
Obviously, Lick Observatory is pretty iconic.
Well, it's the thing about Mount Hamilton is you have to ride it beforehand because it's really 3 climbs with a couple of descents before you get to the top, to the observatory, and it's important to have ridden that a couple times if you're looking for a PR and so on and so forth. All that time is made up on the descents, not on the uphills.
Climb to the observatory is not a tough climb, I don't think. It's the, you know, what do you have left on the backside? You know, it's not one of these really vicious climbs where you're going to throw up at the top or something. You got to sit down and pace yourself. And you know, I always thought of it as like 3 humps kind of to start with. You get the little valley there's a brief downhill and then more climbing, and then another little downhill and a valley, and then you start to get up where the switchbacks are, and that's when it gets kind of exciting. It feels a little more Euro because you see those switchbacks up there.
As a lot of people think, oh, it's a climber's race. It's really not a climber's race. There's, you know, about 60 miles afterwards. And so my goal was to be as conservative as I could, you know, make those selections happen over the climb, and then really focus on the latter half of the race, where I knew sort of a little bit more of my strengths lie.
Seems like there's more attrition than in most road races in Northern California. I mean, just, you know, the hill sorts people out into small little clumps, and then the backside just, you know, you can look ahead, you can look behind and not see anybody as far as you can see. So things really get kind of blown apart. And I can't remember too many other races that get that kind of fractured. So I think it's a tough race, you know, considering it's not that many miles.
I think point-to-point road races like the Mount Hamilton Classic are just so special. There's so few of them, and my favorite part is that you never repeat the same road twice.
There's a certain romance to point, though, that appeals to me.
You know, point-to-point is always really challenging because you really have to know your course well, right? It's not like you get the opportunity to see the sprint twice. It's not like you get the opportunity to go through that corner multiple times. So you really have to understand and do your homework, I guess you could say, before you get on the course. because you just never know, what's going to come your way. Certainly, the wonderful thing about Hamilton on a yearly race is that if you race it multiple times, you get a little bit more used to the course. But every year presents a new challenge. Every year is something, totally different. Know your climb and pace yourself well. I think a lot of people think, especially when they start, because the climbing starts right away. Oh, I gotta stay with the group. I gotta stay with the group. And while that's certainly good, and while pushing yourself is really important, it's also important to understand and have those landmarks in your brain of, checking in and seeing how you're feeling and where am I on this course. Eat and drink a lot. It's a very challenging course in the sense that you think that you're done with the climbs, but there's a lot of false flats and a lot of wind. And what happens is that you end up burning a ton of calories during that time period. And especially because it tends to be very hot out there, you have to be incredibly careful about making sure that you are eating, making sure that you are drinking, making sure that you are taking your bottles during the feed zone, and being very cognizant of what have I eaten when, because it's very easy to bonk on this course without realizing it.
It was a matter of staying up near the front, because the logic I had was you're at the front, you're implicitly controlling the pace. And I just played that strategy basically. You're controlling the pace, all right, but you're not pushing it where you're going to blow. Where if somebody jumps as a chase and you blow up and you're off the back. I'm happy to be here, celebrating the 60th anniversary of this race, this amazing race. I'm happy that it's something for the riders. It's an Olympic development caliber event that's really for the riders. It's just its reputation, by whom it was founded, by which club, just the history. I mean, it's just iconic.
The hotbed of American racing and the foundation of American racing all the way through today can be traced back to that era. I mean, you've got, Hardy and Ritchie and Vieira and a bunch of guys that in the years preceding that were the first group of American riders that were able to start going to Europe and competing.
It's sort of one of the California classics. I guess there's Berkeley Hills, there was Croca Martinez, those big road races that have been going on for a long time, so those are nice ones to win. It's always nice to win any race, but it meant over the winter I went to some bike party and some guy said he'd give his left nut to win Mount Hamilton. And I thought that's a price a little too high, but it made me think, well, maybe there is something to that race.
It was my first season of racing, and it took me a while to figure out how to win bike races, and Mount Hamilton was one of them. And of course, for me, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area and grew up in the East Bay, daring to live in that area and be able to race against these guys and to be able to finally, find it. Well, for me, it was a question more of finding a race where I could simply use my power to win the race. But from that, of course, you build on that and you get a sense of confidence in racing that if you can win a race, which, in the West Coast, the Western United States, Mount Hamilton is one of the hardest races there is, always has been, always will be. It builds your confidence as a racer completely. About a mile or two before the finish, a yellow jacket flew down my front jersey and stung me right on my chest.
75, George Mount was the first one over the top. At the end, I'd never been to the finish line yet, so I didn't know where that was. But somehow we turned a corner and there was a sign that said 500 meters to go. Stood up and ended up winning the sprint. We caught George somewhere along the backside.
Keith Vieira was off the front from the top. Solo attempt. I didn't realize it until we caught up with him. I was oblivious to the fact that he was already gone. So when we caught up with him with about 5 miles to go, there we were, 6 up. And off in the distance, I could see people walking around. Oh, already. Put it together, just momentary realization. Okay, this is it. Already? Eric Allen dropped into Lawrence's wake. And there it was right in front of me. The cockpit. I couldn't have had a better deal. It was just like a given. It was angel in the infield kind of deal. Just dropped into his pocket, and he went as hard and as far as he could before he faded. And the moment he faded, I just jumped on it with everything I had. I didn't look back. Everything just went like clockwork for me. It was pretty surreal. It was like a movie.
I attacked right after the KOM, and that meant that I was solo for the whole rest of the race. And it wasn't only a test of my fitness, but also of my mental strength and concentration. So it definitely was a lot of suffering alone.
And last year there was one girl who had come up from Southern California, and I knew she was really strong, and my goal was really, at the end of the day, was to separate her. So, I mean, no one really had teammates, but I knew that she was kind of probably going to be the only person to follow me up the climb. But then, you know, I wasn't sure what her stamina would be like going, you know, once we descended, going into those flat roller sections, would she be able to hold it? And I was lucky enough that, you know, we worked together for a little bit, and you know, you pick your moments wisely when you know somebody might be tired, when you listen and hear them breathing harder. Kind of we worked together, and that middle climb just after the feed zone, as soon as I saw her shoulder sagging, you know, now is my moment. And I actually attacked, and I think it was a 20-30 mile solo break from that point, and I just rode it inwards, which is ironic because that's pretty much what Elle Anderson did to us and slaughtered us the year before.
I used to be built for hill climbing. I was small and scrawny, so I quite liked going up hills. The other thing that's good for me in a road race is something where it breaks up and there's some attrition, because the odds are a lot better when you're riding in a small group of 5 or 6 at the end than when there's a whole pack there. If there's a whole pack at the end, I won't be doing much. I get a little more motivated when the odds are whittled down. It's got the year on there, and they put your name on there. It's a nice trophy. I don't have any other trophies that I've saved over the years. That's the only one. But mainly it's heavy, it's quite attractive, and they didn't give out that many trophies in those days. Not that I won very many, but that's one worth hanging on to.
Yeah, this is hanging in my garage above the workbench. I think an appropriate place. I'll never get rid of it. I mean, I have some other plaques and stuff, Burlingame or something like that, but this eclipses everything. Nothing comes close. It really doesn't. I'm just happy to be able to, you know, to share the joy with anyone who happens to be watching this.